Hey everybody, this is Elon from Inside Fighting, and this video, my God, is it gonna drive you all a little bit crazy? Because the reason I'm covering it is if you want to get me to cover a martial art, just put the word dog in it. That's pretty much my biggest weakness. And so there's this style that I have recently discovered because I did another Kung Fu style called Chinese dog boxing. I immediately had to Google it. And to be honest, it is the most deadly effective style I've ever seen. In fact, the practitioners have such speed and powerful movement that I don't even know what to say. It's almost hard to cover it. They're vicious. They're truly unstoppable. Anyway, let's get real here for a second. Chinese dog boxing is a very unique system. The most unique thing about it is just how ground centric it is. And I'm going to jump right in. I'm going to tell you what I found on the YouTubes and all the goods and the bads about it. So stay tuned because this episode is legitimately interesting, in my opinion. Maybe one of my better ones.
Pow, pow, inside fighting, yeah, dangerous martial arts. Pow, pow, ooh, ah.
Okay, so Chinese dog boxing. I want to discuss so many different things about this. First of all, the information about it is very lacking online. It's hard to find like a consistent story. What I did find is that they claim it was invented or developed many, many years ago by a traveling nun who was trying to fight off bandits. Now, a lot of the time, these stories with a smaller person fighting off a bigger person don't necessarily make sense, except when they're developed with the kind of movements that you see here. These do look like the kind of movements, when I show them, you'll see, of a smaller person fighting off a bigger person. That's what you would develop here. Much in the same way that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu was developed over the theory of a smaller guy fighting off a bigger guy. A lot of these styles that have heavy grappling, especially on the ground off your back, I tend to believe the stories that these could have developed from smaller people who had to fight off their back. Now, what I will say here, an unfair comparison, is that when I Googled this and when I YouTubed it, there was a lot of comparisons to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Is this China's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu? I think that needs to be cut off right off the bat. They're completely different styles, both in movement, in what their goal seems to be, in approach. And it's just, I don't like when everything is compared to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is its own thing. Great. It's trendy. And we all want to compare everything to it because we're hoping it gets views. But I think this style can stand on its own as a truly weird and different style that has benefits. Now, I'm going to get the bad out of the way before the good, because let's just get it out the way. I think, and this is, true of any style, and I'm going to jump right in here and add this to the stage. I think sometimes you find movements or demonstrations that don't necessarily reflect reality. Now, sadly here, I think maybe they were just trying to put on a fun demo, but like putting your foot in the guy's booty hole and kicking him away, the guy's not going to flip forward. It's not going to create that kind of force that would actually do that. In a real fight, that guy's just going to get on top of you and punch you in the face. There's a lot of commitment, and maybe this is consistent throughout all of them, but at least some of the other moves are far more effective, to going to the ground on your back in a more vulnerable position right off the bat. Okay, so he's right away going to commit himself to the ground. And again, the guy's not going to go flying like that. As a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I have learned it's a lot harder to move the human body than we actually believe it is until you try it against a resisting person. It's very, very difficult. And shout out to Jesse Amkamp. He's right over there. Regardless, that's just one demo. And as I started to explore it further and further and further, I realized that maybe, again, these guys were just excited to be on camera and they were putting on something more dynamic. Because there are some movements here that I do think have value, and I do think there's an interesting system here. So I often talk about the benefits of being able to train when you're older. What I've discovered about this system and many Kung Fu systems in general is maybe because of the focus on breathing and fluid movement. They're not hard impact movements. They develop a longevity, which I just haven't seen in other martial arts. I would argue that Chinese martial arts seem to have the longest lifespan for the practitioner out of any style, including this one, which does involve going to the ground. There's a lot of older people in the videos I saw doing this who move beautifully. And so right off the bat, I have gained an appreciation for forms. The more I research these traditional styles, the more I realize that, number one, they help your breathing, which is a huge part of fighting, but they help it in a very controlled way. In a way that I think combat sports could never give me, because I just don't allow myself the time to focus on breath the same way. The breath is happening in the fight, and I'm learning to breathe in a fight, which is a great skill, but I'm not learning to breathe in a meditative way with movement that will translate over in a high stress situation. I think there's certain benefits to these kind of internal styles that give you slow breath and more controlled breathing. And where is your breath? Is it in your diaphragm? Is it in your lungs? Is it in your throat? Is it in your head? I never thought about breath that way until I started really analyzing these styles. Kung Fu came from Chinese martial arts for me. I'm not saying that's the only place it exists, but it definitely is a foundational principle of even external styles in Kung Fu. They do seem to be heavily breath focused, and that seems no different with Chinese dog boxing. By the way, this style has like 45 names, and I'm going to get them all wrong, so you can hate me for it. Like Dishu boxing, Guquan, dog fist Kung Fu, Chinese dog boxing. I'm calling it Chinese dog boxing mainly because of that video, which too bad you're about to watch it again. This is what's happening. This video is, there you go. Anyway, so what I will say about the benefits of breath is, as someone who suffers from health issues and worries about the longevity of how they're going to be able to train, not all of us are trying to be world champion fighters. I'm in my 40s now. This is where I'm at, and I do now appreciate it. I do like the idea that I could go out and do that, and seeing these people in that age doing it, it's very inspiring. So that's a good thing. That's a positive of the style. That's a positive of many Kung Fu's, arguably katas and Japanese styles too, but I do find Japanese styles are more impact heavy. Not to say that you can't do them at older age. There's a lot of people who do, but they have arthritis. These guys, I don't know if they have arthritis. So let's jump into this next video here. By the way, it's incredibly hard to find video on this style. So this is a story of a guy. He's saying he joined the police academy, and he's kind of walking through his history of developing the style. And he says he was attacked by a knife by an assailant, and he used Dishu boxing or Dishu fist, which is Chinese dog boxing, to fight off the assailant. Okay, and if you look, there's a ground heavy style here. Now, what I will say right away is a lot of these movements do look like what you would see in Qin Na. Definitely Qin Na is a part of this system. For whatever reason, it kind of bled into it. And I would argue also that some of what you're going to see in Dishu fist or Chinese dog fighting has bled into Sanda, in my opinion. I might be completely wrong. And they say that it's called Chinese dog fighting, and you'll see right here, Chinese dog boxing, because they pretty much stole movements from dogs. And I think that's pretty interesting because dogs are the cutest animals in the world. And you see the guy here mimicking the movement. Now, Chinese martial arts are no stranger to mimicking animals. And I think there's some kind of weird value in it sometimes when it teaches your body to move outside the scope of how you would normally move. So these movements seem to be the consistent theme. Go to the ground, attack the small limbs. They attack the wrists, and they attack the ankles a lot. Now, what I will say here, and I'll rewind this, is these are movements. I don't like comparing this to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu because you wouldn't do this in this way in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. But the nice thing that I see here is that they're striking, they're doing it off of punches, they're doing it off of attacks, and their sets, let's just move forward a little bit here. Their sets are two-man sets trying to kind of create a reality-based environment as much as possible. And so they're having attacks before, committing to the ground and doing the takedown. My concern with a lot of these is, will they work against a trained fighter? But the reality is that's irrelevant, because that will work, putting your inside hooks behind the knees is something I do all the time. It's something I actually teach for self-defense, because if someone's standing on top of you, it's a very efficient way to get them off. So, but I don't believe that will choke out the attacker. I don't believe that if someone's bigger and stronger than you, you're going to be able to hold them down like that. So I do think that there's certain aspects here that, again, are esoteric in nature. And, if your goal is self-defense, you have to practice these moves against a resisting opponent. And there's a guy here who modernized the system in a way that I feel does that. But it seems like it does have a lot of these kind of, that's like you're on the ground already. You could scissor take down the guy. Now, scissor sweep. But this is like a reverse scissor sweep. He's pushing the guy forward, not back. That's a traditional approach to a scissor sweep. But I feel like there's maybe a bit of an overcommitment to being taken down in this style. Here's a nice double leg. Like, that's a clean double leg, and he goes right for the throat after. Here he's doing exactly, again, that same philosophy of a pendulum. It's interesting. I think the forms are very, very beautiful. I think the ground fighting techniques are beneficial comparatively to not training, but is this the best ground fighting system in the world? In my opinion, no. I think systems like Sambo, I think Brazilian Jiu Jitsu would be better for you. I think that, Judo, even Newaza, would be more efficient on the ground. But I do see that they have a system here. I do think this would complement something like Shuai which doesn't focus as much on the ground. I think that this will develop other skills that you wouldn't develop in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Again, it'll develop striking, it'll develop whipping power, it'll develop different structures of base that you just won't see in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu or even combat Sambo. So there are benefits to training this that I could definitely see. I also think that they attack small limbs a lot, which is another benefit that you don't see that often in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or even in Sambo. You just don't see those small joint manipulations in the same way. See, here they're training off of attacks. So I have no problem with this. But again, it's a demonstration. It's an exaggerated portrayal of movement. And it was very, 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 very hard to find examples of people who sparred. So let's just go back to this video that I showed later, and you're going to see this guy took his techniques, he advanced them, and he puts people in the ring. And this is kind of now more of a Sanshao approach, where he's putting gear on his guys, he's having them protect themselves, and he's allowing them to fight. And this is what needs to be a part of Chinese dog boxing if it's going to be effective, in my opinion. Like, that was slick. And that could work. So he moves really nice. He's training guys to be fighters. And, you could see I really feel like this is the closest kind of transition to Sanshao of the system that you can get to. So there's a pathway to something very cool in dog boxing, Chinese dog boxing. Again, I kind of want to train it just so I could say I train Chinese dog boxing. But this made me like the style. Again, if you modernize your system, I think you could turn it into something very, very cool. And here's an older video, and you're going to see they're using weapons, they're kind of moving around. But again, fundamentally, my issue is always with does this work? I always come back to that. And if I'm training for self-defense, I have to ask myself that question. And sadly, a lot of like the old school traditional stuff, I just can't see those sweeps and those techniques being pulled off unless the person has zero ground fighting experience, sadly. They remind me a bit of this ninjutsu school I went to, where the guy was actually putting on a show. I came to the class and he's like, what styles do you train? I'm like, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, Muay Thai. He's like, well, this is totally different. We don't do those fancy spinning kicks here. So right away, I knew it was going to be a problem. Let me just get that out the way. Anyway, he kept trying to show these sweeps. And so I'm standing and his student is there. And he showed this sweep that just doesn't work. And I'm not a jerk. I'm not the type of person who's, going to resist hard. But I'm not going to fall over just because you touched my leg. Now, they're all doing this sweep. And every student was falling over it just the second their leg was even tapped. And I just wasn't. And so the student goes to his teacher, goes, it's just not working. What am I doing wrong? And then the teacher comes over and tries to do it on me, and I'm not falling over because I'm not going to fall over unless there is some degree of pressure that makes me want to fall over. I'm not going to just fake it. And he got super pissed, pulled out a ninja star, threw it at the wall, and he's like, yeah, but look what we can do. And I was like, I am so confused right now. And what I realized is they develop, and this is what I worry about in this style, they develop an unrealistic expectation that because in their class, people are so hyper compliant, the second they reach even the most minimal basic amount of resistance, they don't know how to deal with it because they don't know if their technique actually works or not. I'm not saying that is the case here because I did see that video of the guy who modernized it. These people do look powerful, but I do worry that some of the schools of this Kung Fu might suffer from that just based on what I saw. Again, the modernization of it, they had some protection on and they were going for it. I respect that. I think that is the evolution of this system that is impressive. And again, it covers striking, it covers takedowns, it covers submissions. So it is a complete system that has a lot to offer. It's just, again, you can't fall victim to what happened to me in that ninjutsu class. I will say this. I was very impressed with his ability to throw ninja stars. Truly impressed. It was, man, he was spot on with them. It's just I'm not walking around with ninja stars, and that's not a skill I want to learn. And it was incredibly confusing for me. So those are my thoughts on the style. I mean, this is a bit of a weird video because I'm almost confused over how I feel about it. I almost don't know what to say. I said, I said what I said. So hopefully you liked it and you subscribe. You know what I mean? Anyway, I'm sure there's going to be some professional, Chinese dog boxing people in the comment section who can educate me more on it. But again, if you agree with me, I'd love to know, do you see that problem that I see in this system? And do you also see that it could evolve into something much better? I'm just curious how you guys feel about it. Let me know.